They weren't afraid to come to the camp. Most lived in the camp with us. And what did they teach you? Well, I said, we opened our classes with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and sang the National Star-Spangled Banner. It was not necessary, I thought, to tell my granddaughter that the tower guards had their machine guns and bayoneted rifles aimed at us while we pledged allegiance to the red, white, and blue and sang our national anthem. Another episode I thought not necessary to tell Alyssa was that in 1943, Japanese American boys were finally allowed to volunteer in the armed forces. Until then, they were classified 4C enemy aliens. When President Roosevelt tested the loyalty of the Japanese boys, over 10,000 of them volunteered to join the Army, most from Hawaii. But many came from the internment camps, where their parents and siblings were still imprisoned behind barbed wire fences. The Japanese American boys were segregated into two groups. The first group forming the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. The second into the intelligence service as Japanese interpreters and POW interrogators. The 442nd Regimental Combat Team fought against the Germans and was honored as the most decorated unit of its size in the history of the United States Army. There were over 20 soldiers who received the Army's highest award, the Medal of Honor. They were often called the Purple Heart Combat Team because in some outfits, the soldiers received more than one Purple Heart medal for being wounded twice or 3 times in combat. One of their famous accomplishments was a daring rescue of a Texas battalion who were surrounded by Germans for days and were about to be annihilated. Several attempts were made by an American general to rescue the lost battalion. Out of desperation, the general called the 442nd, who were engaged in other battles. And over 800 Japanese American soldiers were ordered to engage the Germans and bring out the Texas Lost Battalion. The mission was accomplished at a deadly cost. Nearly 800 of the Japanese American soldiers were either dead or wounded while rescuing 200 Texans. In the Pacific Front, there were hundreds of Japanese American soldiers who fought against the homeland of their parents. There were the interpreters and special intelligence officers, soldiers who landed on the islands that the Marines invaded: Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Guam, Philippines, Saipan, Iwo Jima, and Okinawa. In the Southwest Asian Front, the information that interpreters gathered from the Japanese POWs saved the lives of hundreds of American soldiers. There were instances when Japanese American soldiers infiltrated the enemy camps and returned with invaluable information for the commanding generals, and one of them being General Merrill of the Merrill Marauders in Burma. General Douglas MacArthur declared at the cessation of the Pacific War that the Japanese American soldiers had shortened the Pacific War by 2 years. Never in military history did an army know so much about the enemy prior to actual engagement, said the general. Many of the Japanese American soldiers served their country while their parents and siblings still remained in concentration camps throughout America. In coming years, there were many Japanese American soldiers who attained the rank of general and sailors who became admirals. In recent years, the chief of staff of the Army was General Eric Shinseki. He is a highly decorated Vietnam veteran whose father and uncle fought in the Second World War. In my family, 2 of my brothers were in the service, one in the Air Force during the Korean War and the other in the Army during the Vietnam War. Both of them were incarcerated at Heart Mountain during the early days of World War II. How long were you in that awful place, Grandma? Alyssa asked. About 3 years. And you returned home to California? Not right away, I told her. Just before the war ended, Papa was able to leave camp and seek employment in Utah. He worked in a tomato cannery. Mama and I left camp to join him when school was over. And each of us were given a total of $25 for our daily needs and for transportation. And we worked in the fields or the cannery. That fateful day when we learned of the atomic bomb being dropped in Hiroshima, Papa was shocked, inconsolable. He still had parents and siblings living there. And what happened to them? Were they annihilated too? After months of anguish and nightmares, not knowing whether he still had a family in Hiroshima, he finally received word from his sister. The family had been living a few miles away from the epicenter of the bomb and was spared. The war was finally over. The camps were being closed, and Papa had to return to Heart Mountain to bring Grandma and my 4 siblings to Utah. Grandpa had died in camp, and his ashes were brought to Utah too. It was now 1946, several months after the war. The replacement for the 442nd Regimental Combat Team were greeted by the Statue of Liberty at Bedloe Island, and they were invited to march down Pennsylvania Avenue in Washington, D.C. before President Harry S. Truman. The president presented the regiment with a presidential citation and declared, "You fought not only the war, but prejudice, and you won." The greatest irony of the mass evacuation of the Japanese from the West Coast came shortly after the defeat of Japan. The Japanese government revealed that the Japanese military could not depend on any of the Japanese in America to do spy or intelligence work for them. Those overseas Japanese, they said, were uneducated peasants. They knew nothing about military strategies. Most of them had never seen a gun, let alone own one, or knew anything about wireless radios. They admitted that the information gathered for the Pearl Harbor attack came from the naval attaches stationed in Hawaii. In 1948, 6 years after we were forced to move out of Los Angeles, we returned home. The atmosphere had not improved. People were still hostile toward us. They did not trust us. We were still the enemy. Passing through Las Vegas, Nevada, Papa, with all 8 of us in the car, stopped at a gas station. And even before he could approach the cashier screamed, "Can't you see that sign? No dogs or Japs allowed here." And many years later, we would be celebrating Papa's 90th birthday at a casino restaurant in Las Vegas, where there were 3 handsome white waiters in tuxedos serving Papa sitting at the head of the table. Papa, dignified and slightly aloof, resplendent in his only suit and tie, sat there as though it was a common occurrence. When one of the waiters placed his steak dinner before him, Papa commenced eating, not with chopsticks, with fork and knife. When he sipped a little water from his glass, another waiter quickly refilled his glass. "Is there anything else we can do for you, sir?" the third waiter inquired. "Thank you," Papa replied, offering a condescending smile, and continued slicing his steak. I kept watching Papa and remembered the no sign or no dogs or Japs allowed incident. Has Papa forgotten it? Has he risen above that indignity? Let bygones be bygones? Has he become like the waiter, an American? It was just a few years after the war that the 1952 Walter McCarran Act was passed in Washington. Asians could now become naturalized American citizens. And Papa studied for the test, passed it, and practices Americanism. While most of his children were Democrats, Papa was a fervent Republican. He said it was a Democratic president who put him in a concentration camp. And how can I vote for a damn Democrat? Religion was discussed openly in our home since we were all Buddhists. Politics however, was a taboo unless you were willing to hear the wrath of a Republican. In California, some loyal Caucasian friends and neighbors greeted them with open arms. They had kept their promise and maintained their homes and farms, and some even went so far as to farm the land and share the proceeds. I graduated from high school, then went on to East Los Angeles Community College. I met my husband, George, got married, and we both graduated from Los Angeles State College. George went on to law school, and I received my bachelor's and my master's degree.